The Maneater of Yemmaydoddi. Dear friends, this is the story of the Maneater of Yemmaydoddi, a man-eating tiger that terrorized the villagers of Yemmaydoddi, India, in the early 1940s. The tiger was responsible for the deaths of at least 13 people, and its reign of terror lasted for over 2 years. The story begins in 1942, when a small male tiger appeared in the Yemmaydoddi locality. The tiger was initially shy and avoided contact with humans, but it soon began to prey on livestock. The villagers were alarmed by the tiger's presence, and they began to take precautions to protect themselves and their animals. In 1943, the tiger began to attack humans. The first victim was a young woman who was working in the fields. The tiger killed her and dragged her body away. The villagers were horrified by the attack, and they knew that they had a man-eater on their hands. Over the next 2 years, the tiger killed 12 more people. The villagers lived in fear, and they were afraid to leave their homes at night. The authorities were also concerned about the tiger, and they offered a reward for its capture. In 1946, a famous hunter named Kenneth was hired to track down the tiger. Anderson was an experienced hunter, and he had a reputation for being able to kill man-eating tigers. He arrived in Yemmaydoddi and began to track the tiger. Let's listen this story described by Kenneth as thus. Yemmaydoddi is an area of forest in the Kadur district of Mysore in southern India. It is bordered by a ridge of foothills, the highest of which is named Hogar Khan, that form the eastern spurs of the great mountain range known as the Baba Budans, which reach a height of 6,500 feet. A magnificent lake, called the Medak, entirely surrounded by forest-clad hills, forms the southern limit of this area, from which a narrow water channel, paralleled by an equally narrow forest road, runs for 10 miles northeastwards, till the former joins a smaller lake about 3 miles north of the little town of Byrer. This area is rich in game, and still richer in vast herds of cattle that are driven into the forest by day to graze, and driven back each evening to Byrer. Small wonder it is, then, that the surroundings abound with tiger, that come there in the first instance as game killers, to feed on the plentiful sambar, spotted deer and wild pig, but sooner or later become cattle lifters, because the cattle are so much easier to kill and because of the complete complacency and indifference with which the local herdsmen look after their charges. It is no exaggeration to say that hardly a day passes without the loss of a fine cow or bull in the jaws of a tiger, while the panther's destruction of calves, goats and village dogs on the outskirts of Byrer is almost as common. Actually, these smaller carnivores are fewer in number than their bigger cousins, and confine themselves to the outskirts of the town itself, well out of the tiger area, because of their fear of the larger animal to whom they themselves sometimes fall prey. Early in 1946 a small male tiger appeared in this locality with habits distinctly its own. It began with minor killings of calves and goats, snatched in the evenings from returning herds, near the outskirts of Byrer, and its depredations were at first taken for those of a panther, except for the characteristic breaking of the neck in the case of the larger calves. This method of killing is almost exclusively followed by tiger, and sometimes by the larger species of forest panther, known as Thendu in Hindustani, so that there was appreciable cause for mistake in identifying the marauder as one of the latter, till on one occasion a frightened herdsman actually witnessed the killing of a young cow, whereafter the question was no longer in doubt. This young animal rapidly grew to adulthood in the area, miraculously escaping the shots of various shikaris, both indigenous and foreign, and grew in cunning and daring too, till in 18 months it became a major menace to the cattle grazers, killing twice, and occasionally thrice a week, and invariably selecting a particularly fine specimen on each occasion. I accompanied a party of friends to Yemmaydoddi, with the object of procuring a trophy for one of them, Alfie Robertson, who was shortly due to return to England. I had received news of the tiger on several occasions, and felt sure it would be a fairly easy matter for my companion to bag the animal, provided we camped at Byrer a few days till receiving news of a kill. We motored from Bangalore, the distance being 134 miles. Unfortunately, I was detained at my office, and we left late in the evening. The roads were execrable, and we met with an accident near a place called Tiptur, 86 miles from Bangalore. We were using my friend's car and he was driving. The rear wheel went over a deceptively flat stone, which stood up on its edge when the wheel passed over one end of it, the other cutting a 9-inch slit in the petrol tank, which was at the rear of the car. 8 gallons of gasoline thereupon poured onto the road, and the vehicle came to a stop. We had no spare petrol, but were carrying a Primus stove, for which we had brought 2 bottles of paraffin oil. Passing one end of the rubber lead of the foot pump into a bottle of paraffin, we contrived to fit the remaining end on to the pipe leading into the carburetor after having first started a siphon feed. Thus we managed to cover the short remaining distance to Tiptur. Here we awoke, the only tinker in town, unbuckled the fuel tank and managed to patch up the rent with the side of a paraffin tin which I found outside some sleeping inhabitant's house. Next came the major problem of fuel for the onward journey. We pushed the car to the one petrol station in the town, only to be informed that the supply of gas had been exhausted the previous day and would not be replenished till noon the next day, at the earliest. It seemed that we were doomed to a prolonged halt at Tiptur. There were 1 or 2 lorries in the town. We awoke the sleeping drivers and offered them fabulous prices for just 1 gallon of petrol to carry us the 16 miles to the next town of Arsakir, where was a Burma Shell petrol pump at which we were bound to be able to get a FRESH supply. But one and all pleaded they themselves had run out of fuel, and were awaiting the expected FRESH stock at noon next day. The situation was disheartening, till I decided on adopting desperate measures. It was about 3:30 a.m., and scruples and conscience, like the town of Tiptur, had long since fallen asleep. Calling to Alfie to bring the paraffin tin, from which we had cut the patch for our fuel tank, and carrying the rubber lead of the foot pump myself, we calm men said a stealthy stalk through the silent streets of Tiptur. In a lane we spotted a model Ford. Instructing Alfie to keep careful watch against the owner awakening, I crept forward on the offside of the vehicle. Reaching the bonnet, I removed the fuel tank cover behind the engine, slipped one end of the rubber tube into the tank, and siphoned a little over a quart of the precious fuel into the tin, which I balanced between my knees. A second trip procured us another quart. Mixing the fuel with the remaining bottle of paraffin oil, we made off hastily to Arsakir, where we obtained a fresh supply. As a result, we did not arrive at our destination, the small town of Byrer, until about 7:30 in the morning. We passed through the town and had gone about 2 miles towards the forest, when we came upon an open field in which a number of vultures were crowded. My friend took a photograph, while I got down to investigate the cause of this assembly, and was agreeably surprised to find a half-grown bullock, killed by a panther, right up against the hedge that bordered the road we had just traversed. There was no doubt that the kill had been made by a panther, as the fang marks on the throat of the dead animal showed where it had been strangled. The vertebrae of the neck were intact and had not been broken, which would have been the case had the killer been a tiger. Besides, the under portion of the animal had been eaten, while the entrails were still inside the carcass, conclusively proving a panther to have been the miscreant, for a tiger is a clean feeder, and before beginning a meal makes an opening in the rear portion of its kill, through which it removes the entrails and stomach to a distance of 10 feet, so that its meal shall not be polluted with excreta. We were highly delighted at this early stroke of luck, and after protecting the kill from the vultures with branches broken at a distance from the hedge, I constructed a hide in the hedge itself, overlooking the kill at point-blank range. We made a good job of this construction, and Alfie felt himself more than compensated for the trouble we had experienced with his car the night before, in the certainty of bagging the panther when it returned to its kill late that evening. We then moved on some distance, ate, and slept in preparation for the night's adventure. By 5 p.m., we returned to the kill and our hideout, removing the covering which had effectively kept the vultures from the dead animal. Alfie then sat himself inside the hide, complete with rifle, torch, blanket and water bottle, and I was in the act of driving back to Byrer in the car, when a breathless herdsman ran up to inform us that one of his large milch cows had just been killed by a tiger, hardly half an hour earlier and not a mile away. I gave the decision to Alfie. Would he prefer a panther as a certainty or a tiger as a chance? In keeping with what would have been my own decision, he chose to make an attempt on the tiger. We accordingly bundled the paraphernalia out of the hide and into the car, drove swiftly up the road for half a mile till the herdsman told us to stop, brought the things out again, and then hastened after him into the forest and to the kill. We did not have far to walk, and within 3 furlongs came upon the dead animal, a fine black milking cow. The neck had been distinctly broken and bubbles of froth were still coming from the nose. But the tiger had not eaten a morsel, evidently having been disturbed by the herdsman, or perhaps by the buffaloes, which had been grazing along with the cattle. It was now 6 p.m. and rapidly growing dark. Unfortunately, there was no tree at this spot, and a few minutes' search made it evident we would either have to abandon the kill or risk a ground shot at the tiger when it returned. Alfie was too keen even to hear of abandoning the kill, so with the help of the herdsman I broke a few branches from adjoining bushes, and made a very rough hide, into which we all clambered shortly after 6:30 p.m. It was almost dark by now, and within 15 minutes the outline of the dead cow, 25 yards away, faded into obscurity. Although moonless, the stars diffused sufficient light to enable us to see in the immediate vicinity, but the kill itself was just out of range. An hour passed, and then about half a mile away I heard the weird cry of the solitary jackal. Much has been written and many theories propounded about this strange phenomenon of the forests, the lone jackal. Jackals usually wander in packs near the outskirts of towns and villages, the precincts of which they enter at night in search of offal. Their chorus cry, headed by a leader, is distinctive, familiar to the people of India, and sounds something like, "Oh, oh, where? Where? Oh, where? Here. Here, here. 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 Here, he-ja. He-ya, he-ya. Here, he-ya. Ya. Ya, ya. The lone jackal, however, although a jackal of the same species in every sense of the word, adopts a very different call. His solitary, long-drawn, bawl had earned him a reputation, coupled with endless superstitions, fables, and jungle lore. But from this maze of conjecture 2 theories stand out. The first is that this jackal accompanies a tiger or panther, generally the former, which it leads to a kill by its weird cry, claiming as its share of the strange partnership a bite at the remains after the rightful owner has gorged its fill. The second theory is that the lone jackal attaches itself to a particular carnivore which it follows at a very safe distance, most tenaciously, in order to make certain of regular meals at what is left over from kills every time his patron feeds. Whichever of the 2 theories is correct, the presence and cry of a lone jackal is a certain indication of the proximity of a tiger or panther, a fact of which I have had personal corroboration in many forest areas of India. Therefore, the cry of the lone jackal told us that night, in as definite a way as if we had seen the tiger itself, that the cattle slayer was approaching. About 10 minutes elapsed and then we heard a distinct uggle asterisk in the direction of, and beyond, the kill. The tiger had arrived. Softly I nudged Alfie's leg, but he was all attention. Time passed, and we heard a slight crackle in the scrub followed by a faint thud and dragging sound. Alfie depressed the torch switch and a bright beam of light flared out. Unfortunately, with the uncertain background, he misjudged the spot where the kill was lying, and shone a little too far to the left. The warning was enough for the tiger, and with a guttural wrroof, it sprang back into the shelter of the undergrowth. We remained an hour longer, but I knew it was time wasted, and that the tiger would not return. At the end of this time we heard a faint aung-ong-hel oon as the tiger crossed a ridge over a mile away, leaving us to ourselves. Ruefully we packed up and returned to the car, only to find that Alfie had mislaid the switch key. While searching, the night bus, carrying passengers from the town of Lingadhalli to Bairar, passed us. Then Alfie found the key, and we followed in the wake of the bus. Arriving at the spot where we had constructed our hideout for the panther, we were surprised to see, reflected in the glow of the headlights of the bus before us, the eyes of the leopard which had now returned and was devouring its kill. At the same time, the driver of the bus saw the eyes and brought the ponderous vehicle to a halt with a screech of brakes, and a cloud of suffocating dust which enveloped us behind. Alfie and I got down, walked abreast of the bus, and located the panther sneaking away half across the intervening field. He fired, and the animal sprang into the air with a sharp RR. And then streaked across the field like greased lightning. Too late, we realized that we had done the wrong thing. Alfie should have got back again in our hideout, and I should have driven away in the wake of the bus. The leopard would undoubtedly have returned to its kill within minutes of the departure of the two vehicles, and given Alfie an easy shot. As matters stood, I had not counseled correctly, and we had now a wounded leopard on our hands. But it was no use crying over spilt milk, so we returned to Byrer, to spend the night at the travelers' one bungalow. Next morning found us back at the spot, and after casting around I found a faint blood trail which began to make itself evident only at the extreme end of the field, increasing as we entered the dense undergrowth. Here we were confronted with a tough proposition. The leopard had evidently been hit in the flank, and it had taken time for the blood to flow down the animal's side and drip to the ground, which is why it only appeared as a blood trail at the end of the field. Thereafter it had dripped freely, while the animal had crawled into the densest undergrowth, consisting of lantana and, wait a bit, shrubs, where it was impossible to follow except on hands and knees. A time-worn wild pig trail led through this undergrowth, and the leopard had passed along it, as was evident by the copious blood trail he left. On hands and knees, and pushing my cocked .405 Winchester before me as I progressed, I crawled in the wake of the wounded beast with Alfie bringing up the rear, as a safeguard against a flank attack, or one from behind. We had progressed about 75 yards in this fashion when, without warning, the leopard, which had been lying up at the next bend in the trail, saw fit to launch his attack. There was hardly room for a miss, and I hit him almost at muzzle length, the soft-nosed bullet smashing his skull and completely removing the rear segment of the brain pan. He died in front of me, the fluid from his brain oozing from his shattered skull. We remained at Byrer a full 10 days, but in all this time only one further kill occurred, and that on the forenoon of the 7th day at a place 6 miles down the Yemmaydoddi channel. By the time that word of the incident was brought us and we arrived at the spot, it was late evening and we found that vultures had completely demolished the kill, no precaution having been taken to hide it with leaves. A tree overlooked the remains at about 40 yards distance, and Alfie sat in a crotch till midnight, but the tiger did not put in an appearance. Thereafter nothing happened, as I have said, and on the morning of the 11th day we left for Bangalore. Time passed. Then one dark night along the road from Lingadhalli to Byrer motored a quartet of car shikaris, people who shoot from their car with the aid of spotlights, never so much as setting foot to the ground when passing through the forests off-tracking, the science of big game shooting, and the beauties of the jungle and Mother Nature, they know nothing and care less. For them, the highest form of sport lies in casting intense beams of light from their sealed beam spotlights into the bordering forest and discharging a volley of rifle and gun shots at whatever eyes might catch and reflect the brilliance of their sealed beams. As to what animal they fire at, male, female or young, they do not care, for they are filled only with the lust to kill or wound. Needless to say, such activities are against all existing regulations, but they often take place nevertheless. And so it transpired that, when about 4 miles from Byrer, they picked up the large fiery white eyes of a tiger as it crested a bank that bordered the road. 2 shots rang out and the tiger sprang away, its lower jaw smashed at the extremity by a rifle bullet, while the other shot had gone wide. Needless to say, the car shikaris did not stop to investigate, nor did they return next morning to trail the wounded beast and put it out of its misery. They merely went on their way, seeking for other eyes at which to fire. The wounded tiger must have suffered intense agony for the next 2 months, nor could it eat properly. Being unable to maintain a death grip on its prey with a badly healed broken lower jaw, it was unable to procure its usual food in the form of game or cattle. One day, about 3 months later, it attempted to secure a goat from a herd that had been driven to graze in the forest. With infinite caution it stalked the herd, and had just sprung upon a fat nanny, to kill her with a powerful blow from its paws. instead of the usual neck-breaking process with the jaw, when the audacious herdsman, standing close by, flung his staff. The chance aim proved true in this instance, and the staff caught the tiger a flanking blow. Enraged, it charged the herdsman, the Pablo substitute again proving eminently successful in almost completely scalping the unfortunate man while still alive. His scream of terror and agony was cut short by another powerful blow of the forepaw, which this time crushed the man's skull as if it had been an egg. The man collapsed, leaving the tiger the choice of two victims to eat, the goat or a human being. It hesitated over the carcass of the latter, and licked the blood that oozed from the smashed skull as if to make a fair comparison. It then went across to the nanny, which it seized by the neck and after a moment began to carry away into the jungle thickets. But within a few paces, and for no accountable reason, it stopped, dropped the nanny, walked across to the dead herdsman, and seizing him by a shoulder, disappeared into the all-concealing fastnesses of the surrounding forest. The dreaded Maneater of Yemmaydoddi was thus created, and his reign of stark terror had commenced. Thereafter, deaths attributable to this beast occurred within an area of about 250 square miles, ranging from Byrer, Lingidhalli, and up to Bogavadkate on the north, across to Santavari on the Baba Budan Mountains on the west, and southwards past the Ironkir Lake to Sakrapatna and back to Byrer. While human kills followed each other with alarmingly increasing regularity, they were spaced along a definite beat and had the distinctive mark that every victim had been killed by a powerful blow of the paw and not by the usual fatal jaw grip. Further, the fact that the tiger was unable to use its lower jaw effectively was amply evident through examination of the various corpses, to none of which was it the man-eater's custom to return for a second meal. The flesh had been scraped from them in a peculiar way, obviously by the upper jaw working alone on the strips of human flesh which this animal would lay bare with its powerful claws to facilitate the difficult task of eating. With the advent of the man-eater, the activities of the erstwhile very energetic cattle-killing tiger which had been operating along the Yemmaydoddi and Lingidhalli routes, ceased abruptly, leaving room for the conclusion that it was this cattle-lifter, and none other, that had now developed into a man-eater. The story of the Karshikaris did not become known for some time, till one of them, in a moment of boastful hilarity, revealed that they had fired at and wounded a tiger on the Byrer-Lingidhalli road. A subsequent piecing together of these facts brought the story to light as we now know it. As I have said, the man-eater followed an almost well-defined beat, killing at the outskirts of villages and hamlets bordering the places I have named, and in regular succession. These facts I gathered upon reading the reports that appeared in the press regarding the beast's activities, and by marking off on my forest map the names of these places and the dates on which people had been killed. The center of this region, which the tiger had chosen as a regular beat, comprised the rocky and heavily forested slopes of the foothill range, topped by the hill called Hogar Khan, some 4,500 feet in height. I concluded that these fastnesses, almost without population, sheltered the tiger, that from them it made forays into the more populous areas in a series of almost regular calls. A study of the dates of past killings revealed that the animal almost regularly returned along its rounds every third or fourth month. The total number of killings had by this time reached 27. In making my attempt to shoot this animal, I decided to operate at the village of Hogarhalli, which lay almost midway between Byrer and Lingidhalli, and was only 3.5 miles from the base of Mount Hogar Khan itself through downwardly sloping scrub jungle. I selected this area primarily because I was fairly well acquainted with the geography of the surrounding forest, and was fairly well known to the inhabitants, from whom I could expect reasonable cooperation. Further, the village of Hogarhalli was, as I have said, near to the foothills of Hogar Khan, where I was sure the tiger had its headquarters. Most important of all, this village had not escaped losing a life every time the tiger passed on his rounds. In other words, it was almost a certain call for him. I arrived at Hogarhalli a full fortnight before the close of the 3-month cycle, that is within 2 to 6 weeks of the next projected visit. Thus, I gave myself plenty of time to make inquiries into the details and nature of the various killings, and to arrive at a plan of circumventing this brute if possible. The village itself is fairly large and although not very heavily populated, contains houses of a permanent nature, constructed from stone of reddish hue which abounds in the vicinity, occurring in the form of flakes and varying in size from the palm of one's hand to an area of several square feet. Hoggarhalli is also old, it dates from distant times and possesses two ancient and solidly built temples. It is bounded on the west, southwest and northwest by the dense scrub leading to Hogar Khan, and on the south by a large and beautiful lake that abounds with geese, wild duck and teal in the winter months, to the south of which a track leads to the Yemmaydoddi water channel about 3 miles away. To the southeast lies a belt of dense plantations of coconut and banana trees, interspersed with the tall slim stems of the areca nut, the whole being thickly matted below by growths of the betel vine, the leaves of which are liberally chewed by Indians throughout the peninsula. This area consists of very moist land, naturally low-lying and irrigated by a channel from the lake to the south of the village. Southward of Hoggarhalli lie a few scattered rice fields, and then southeastwards and eastwards and northwards fields of dry crops, fed only by the monsoon rains, extending up to the Birralingad road, about 2 miles away. As you may have guessed by now, the majority of kills occurred in the scrub belt to the west, southwest and northwest, while 2 had taken place in the heart of the coconut plantation itself, one of the victims being a cousin of the owner. The remaining and more open areas had been avoided by the man-eater. Furthermore, the kills had taken place in the late afternoon in the majority of cases, as the inhabitants had, since the killings commenced, cultivated the healthy habit of securing themselves indoors before sundown.